if the position's budgeted, why would we not fill the position if the budget is there? I mean, I would think we would either make that decision at budget time or not.
Or to cut the service, I mean, stay up the
So
service.
that would be, that's
I mean,
the
if
service
you got-
question is.
If you don't hire a garbage collection person,
Yeah,
you can't.
I understand, I'm just saying if a board member wanted a vacancy rate that was of last year, they could still achieve it by holding the position open if there was the votes on the board.
And if there's open positions.
And if something came open, yes,
Right.
correct. And right now, everything's filled. Okay.
So on page 20, again, this is just a reprint of, this is the version that went out with the second quarter financial report. First page talks about, again, all the things that we've covered in general about, being very dependent on property tax revenues for 75% of the budget. There's no rampant expansion of greenfields here with new developments to broaden that tax base. So you're really, the cost increases that occur over time, have to be managed in a way that, balance these factors against each other. And the page 21 then really, again, is, we've reiterated these points as we got into some of the earlier material. We forecast that we'd be about $600,000 as a broad stroke increase coming up for 2020 budget as a starting point. And that's about where we're at.
It's up to 5.9% increase in taxes.
The 5.37.
5.3, okay.
Yeah. One of the caveats we haven't talked about is the village needs to make sure that we respond in our budget discussions to maintain eligibility for our expenditure restraint funding from the state. That's $275,000 of revenue we get from the state if we comply with that. I've got every expectation as we go through this budget process that part of that wrap-up, or I take that back, not part of the wrap-up, but after the wrap-up discussion, I will have the tools at my disposal to bring forth the budget amendments at the public hearing to make sure that we are in compliance if the core budget that survives the wrap-up process is not in compliance. There's some shifting and accounting we can do to make sure we stay in compliance with that. So
I don't understand that, because what bothers me is you came to the board with 5.37, whatever it is, increase in taxes.
Well, can I clarify?
$600,000.
Yeah, but that's not, so one of the things that we talked about when we started the session, and I guess I just wanna be really clear about this. We put together the document to provide a framework to have the next point of discussion, which is with this group.
Is that today?
So, we're starting that discussion, and we're gonna continue this discussion for the next 45 days, which is taking a look at where our priorities are gonna fall out within that, because we don't find that to be palatable.
I've worked for government before too, but I've never been presented with that big of an increase in a budget from staff.
We're not proposing that big of an increase.
And so today's the day we should be talking about it. We only have 3 more budget meetings?
But we talked about priorities and projects and have been sorting through those for months.
Mhm.
Staff went away as cost and provided us a framework with what that looks like.
I get
From
that.
here,
And if we
yeah.
can't maintain, I think you're getting to the point of the expenditure limit, which is only a $300,000, Mark can shift money around. That is hard for me, because that's what happens every year in budget. Trustee Chair Menta, where it's like, at the end, they come and they fix everything up, and magically we can stay under it. And I'd rather have it all on the table today, which is, how do we magically fix it at the end? Just let us know what's going on and what the numbers could shift. I understand all that stuff, so that if we do have to make cuts, we understand we could also do this other stuff that Mark knows about. It's uncomfortable, because it's like, here you go, here's what you guys wanted, almost a 6% sales, 5.3, 7, increase in taxes. You guys figure it out based on what your priorities are, even though we did our priority session, and we have 4 sessions to do this. But if you can't figure it out, I can move some numbers around. It's really just hard for me to hear that.
I don't think he's saying that, he's saying how he structures the accounting. He'll be able to get us under the technical.
Again, I don't envision this body approving a 5.37% tax levy increase, and giving the board's consideration of whatever that final outcome is after the wrap-up meeting. There are ways to account for the various expenditures and how they're funded
How much?
that
100,000?
can maintain that eligibility this year. The problem is that these are one-time applications, but given the village's current budget, you know, I'm just simply saying that I don't want to throw unnecessary concern at that we won't be able to meet the village's expenditure restraint requirements. But I also understand the reality that I don't expect this full loaded.
Maybe you can give us a
cap.
for example of what
It's
you
like
might do.
For example, if we shift more state transportation funding to capital, that reduces the property taxes needed to be levied in capital.
We've done that before.
Now, it increases the property taxes that need to be levied in the general fund, okay, because that's where they come from. The property taxes in the general fund aren't what qualifies under the expenditure restraint program. It's the expenditures in the general fund that count towards the expenditure restraint program. Under those guidelines, it doesn't matter how they're funded. So, within the scope of the relative size of the capital projects fund, I'm suggesting to the board that whatever due diligence this process results in, I will be able to have recommendations as needed to make sure the village maintains that eligibility for expenditure restraint in the 2020 budget cycle. If I have to leverage that too heavy this year, I may not be able to make that assertion next year, but this is again a very incremental thing. Let's see how this year's budget.
So are you saying, just a last question on that, if right now we have a 5-point proposed, so at some point we'll get the manager's proposed budget, correct? Executive
It's
proposed
on your
budget?
desk.
Oh, it's on the desk, so, and it's still a 5.3, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so that's the recommended budget from the
Which
executive.
no, it's a framework for us to continue that discussion.
That was part of the meeting.
Okay, we've always had a recommended budget, but
Correct.
it's different now.
And so
Okay,
what we started talking about, and that's why we acknowledge, it's like in the history component of this memo, you know, as we work together, you know, all boards are different. Traditionally, yeah, I'm kind of going out on my comfort zone too, ask Mark, ask the staff. Because this board has really wanted an opportunity to weigh in terms of what they believe the priorities should be coming out in that next year.
And we did that, right? During prioritization?
Correct, you're also gonna hear from us as we go through, I think in a greater level of detail, as Mark, you know, echoed tonight, you know, as related to capital and some other items, where you're gonna hear from us from an operational perspective, that may not match up with maybe the priorities you had from an initiative perspective.
So for instance, like, we wouldn't fund that, we would do a reduced amount of funding, but, okay, so you'll say it, but it's not on a piece of paper.
No, it's
It's
in the document. I mean,
Okay.
we've
Okay.
gone through, you know, process of providing, you know, because we don't want anyone to go in blind through this process, but we recognize that you've clearly asked for something to be more collaborative.
Well, we asked for a 0%, option for a 0% budget last year. I don't know how that changed, but I wasn't in the pre-meetings.
So just to back up to last year, there was no specific motion from this board that said 0% budget.
I mean, that was an initiative, but I
Okay.
don't think that was an initiative that we all agreed on.
You know, and so one of the things that
We got options last year.
No, it wasn't an initiative. I mean, I mean, I think the point is though, that whether you call it the recommended budget or, you know, what we're starting at is 5.37 levy increase. That's where we're starting.
Mhm.
And I mean, I guess, I don't know that, I mean, I certainly don't support a 5.37 levy increase, but So I hope that we can expect some assistance in figuring out how to get that number down, because, I mean, some other government
That would
agencies
charge.
just say, okay, across the board reduction of 10% or whatever we need to do. I mean,
Right.
we could do it that way, you
Right.
know, or we can, say, you know, start being more we can do what we did last year and say, well, we
Right.
just can't fund this vehicle this
And
year.
I guess I'm just asking about process this year because it's changed. I really liked it last year. It didn't mean we were gonna get to 0%, but it gave us that little chart and we had a meeting dedicated to it to say, fill in and to get to 0 beforehand or
Mhm.
get to whatever percentage you wanted, and if you had
And we
different
could do
ideas, you
that
could
again
fill it
this
in.
year.
Okay,
Right.
I'm just asking that because, that was staff recommending things or helping us recommend things. I mean, we're not the experts, you guys are the staff that says, okay, if you wanted to get to 1%, here are some ideas, and I know you gave us that sheet, but that's last year's sheet. I don't see anything that much new on it, is it? Is it
What sheet?
the one that you're reading off of? So anyways, but my question at the end was, and that's just process oriented. If you're saying that we have a 5.3, you know, in the budget sitting on my table, increase in taxes, and that's where we're at based on the initiatives that we've come up with and things like, and costs to continue. If we didn't change anything at the end of the budget, do you have enough wiggle room to cover what's expenditure restraint? We can only do 300,000.
Yes.
So you'd have $200 and something thousand wiggle room somewhere. So,
Yes.
so that's really what we probably need to know. So you would.
Yes, that's what I thought I started out
Okay.
saying, that I could facilitate that.
I didn't know about the whole amount, okay.
So, and just to carry on this, I know we really didn't discuss this in committee, but it's, again, the, really on page 22 then is where we start talking about little more strategic options on, you know, how do we manage these year-over-year increases of needs and community initiatives and operational needs and just general cost. And one of the ways to do that is to broaden the revenue base. So you're right, there's nothing new on this list. It's a recap of the topics that the board asked us to brainstorm and put forth as conceptual ideas. And those remain valid. So there are ways, now, at this stage of the game, you know, I mean, part of this memo is, you know, if you wanna pursue these, as soon as possible action would be better.
When can we give you some ideas?
At your discretion throughout the process, you know. I would have hoped that some of these might have come up before budget, so that we would
I mean, it's like.
have considered,
give
you
a
know, but
increase of-
the board considered all
Instead of
these
2%
last.
salary increase, you give it 1%, like
Okay.
that, how much is that?
That's
per-
right here.
Hold on.
So the board considered all these last year. You know, we're not blazing any new ground, but we just wanna make sure that everybody recognizes that these are still in the background. You know, if there's any momentum to redress some of these, please bring them forward as a trustee in the budget process and get a feel for the room. Again, staff doesn't necessarily recommend any of these, but these are the options that we've identified, again, to achieve certain goals. What's the impact if you eliminate the COLA? What's the impact if you increase health insurance costs? What's the impact if you were to put parking meters on Oakland or something of that nature? Wheel tax came up last year. So these have been vetted.
But that's off the table, right? Didn't we vote on that separately?
That was
We
last
would
year's
go back
budget
and
process,
we
yes.
would, that nothing right now, we put in, there was a decision to put it into the community survey, and then there was a request to review that after parking and transportation came back. Because I
Right,
think
so
at the
then
time
it's
there wasn't
ready.
specific things,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
And I just want to reiterate Mark's point to just follow up again, because I just wanna be crystal clear about this, and Tyler was helpful in bringing up the same memo that you had last year before you overview time, identified as 6.4%.
Right.
So I only provide that to you with perspective to share the fact that we're reiterating that we wanna continue to work on this with you and go through that further refinement. of where we're going to be. And
Yeah, I understand.
Okay.
It was initiative last year, and so then that threw me off that the process is not the same, and we're not gonna try to get it down.
Well, the summary table I think you're referring to was done in preparation for the wrap-up meeting, which is after we had the roundtable on the specific departmental budgets, the capital budgets, utility budgets, you know, pretty much the whole gamut. Then we collected all those topics to be addressed, right? For the wrap-up meeting, and I organized them in different manners. We gave you some target information. I have no reason to not expect to be able to do that same thing for the board this
I
year.
mean, I think what we may need to start thinking about, and some of them are on the list, but we may need to start thinking about levels of service. And are we gonna do leaves the same way? Are we gonna we have continued to do snow removal from the business district. I mean, there are some level of service issues here, but I mean, I feel like the easy fruit we have already picked, the planters in the business district, and you know, there's things that I think need to be added. I mean, I think we probably need to add, for example, more snowflakes for the holiday season. I think we need to add, I would like to see added some money in terms of the cost to going to a $15 wage. Not all the way, but, you know, trying to make some progress towards that. So I think there's still some, if I could finish, I think so and there may be other pluses that other trustees would like to see in the budget too. So, what I think is lacking a little bit here is like, what actual services, what actual decisions would we need to make, service reductions? I mean, we have a certain COLA that we have, and maybe we could decide not to do COLAs, but if we keep the same labor force, we have a certain increase in costs. So we either need to cut, capital via